On the panel today to discuss British Columbia is Walter Coles. He is the CEO of Skeena Resources. We have Dave Nikolejsin. He is the Deputy Minister for Mines and Energy of British Columbia. We have Steve Burleton. He's the CEO of GT Gold. And Chad Norman Day, who is the President of Tahltan Central Government. Before I toss out the first question, maybe just a few numbers when it comes to BC. Just last week, PwC released its 51st report on British Columbia mining. And I think the fact that that report is in its 51st year is telling in and of itself. So gross mining revenues in British Columbia last year was $12.3 billion. And that is up from 8.7 in 2016. Cash flow from operations, 5.1 billion, and that's up from 2.6 in 2016. The 18 operating mines had net income of $3.5 billion last year. And in 2014, that number was in the millions. It was 288 million. Direct employment is 11,280 people versus 9,300 in 2016. And I think what's important for the audience here, return on shareholder investment in British Columbia mining last year was 27.6%. And that is up from 13.5% in 2016. Given that background, I think my first question is, and it's a pretty broad one, is what makes British Columbia a leading destination for mining investment? And I think I'll start with you, Dave.
Sure, thank you. And thanks everyone for your attendance today. So I made kind of several notes, I think, that all speak to answer to that question. And I'd like to just, first of all, before I kind of get into those list of things, just talk about how important it is for, I think, sessions like this, but also for BC to just show up here, not only here today at this session, which is important, but just to be here in town, meeting with people and kind of doing some myth busting, because I think the kind of things you're going to hear about today are far too often not actually in the kind of newspapers or clippings or headlines that you get out of BC. Those numbers are good numbers and getting better and they're trending in the right direction. But there's lots of positive things we are doing that tend not to be the focus of the media. So I think, to start off with, we do have a mining industry. We're not aspiring to one. We have a mining industry, and you just heard some numbers, but there's 16 operating mines in British Columbia right now, mix of some large metallurgical coal mines, metal mines, and some others. There's a vibrant industry on the placer side as well. I would say that we've got a few mines in care and maintenance right now from when times were not so good a couple of years ago, and those are hopefully going to be restarted as well. And then we have lots of prospects, prospective mines, and you're going to hear about some of them from others that are here with us in town today. The exploration sector is also really thriving. It continues to grow. We've seen a revitalization year over year in exploration, just in the raw numbers, but also very interesting to see some of the major companies coming back into British Columbia, buying back into projects, partnering on major projects, and that very much bodes well for a continued growth in potential mines in future in BC. Our infrastructure story is very strong. A lot of that infrastructure was created to support the industry. We've also got a very strong and vibrant independent power industry in British Columbia, which has also created a lot of infrastructure, and which obviously facilitates exploration, but it's also there to support these projects, including most notably our Northwest Transmission Line, which is about a $750 million power project that reaches right into the center of the Golden Triangle in British Columbia that you're going to hear more about up here today. Lots of capacity, roads, highways, but also ports, 2 major ice-free ports in northern British Columbia to support exports. our world-class geology. We've got the rocks speak for themselves, which is all of those existing mines and investment I just talked about, but also world-class geoscience. We have a BC Geological Survey and also independent geoscience that we support as the government with the BC Geoscience Group. We're investing more. So current government has made some significant investments coming out of our Mining Jobs Task Force, which in and of itself showed the support of the government for the industry. Things like making our mining flow through share tax credit permanent, making our mining exploration tax credit permanent, both of which are very helpful for long-term investment in British Columbia. Government's made $20 million available for my budget, which, trust me, is not a big budget to start with. So that's a very material increase to allow us to hire more people, speed up permitting, do a better job around working with companies around health and safety and those kinds of things. And funding for things like a BC Regional Mining Allowance, which is allowing us to be here today. And last thing I'll say is, also a real attentiveness, and I can talk about it more if people have questions, around how the government right now is turning its attention to overall competitiveness of the industry to make sure as we kind of continue to strive for strong environmental performance, we don't push trade-exposed industries out of our province in that effort. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think we'll get another government perspective. Chad, can you, in terms of the territories of the Tahltan, what makes your territories great for mining investment?
Yeah, so I come from a territory that has a very deep history of mining. As you can see on my vest and around my neck, I'm wearing obsidian. Tahltan Nation has been mining obsidian for at least 8,000 years. Our people have been in the modern day mining for several generations. I'm here with my father, who's worked in several of the mines. His father worked in the mines. When I was a teenager, I started working at an exploration camp with BC Metals, and that eventually turned into Red Chris Mine. I believe last year, 50% of the exploration expenditures took place in Tahltan territory. We are 70% of the Golden Triangle. Of those active mines that you had mentioned earlier, 3 of them are within or right on the outskirts of Tahltan territory. So in terms of capacity and support for the mining industry, I think Tahltan Nation is probably at the top in British Columbia, possibly throughout Canada. And since I've been doing this work and taking on the leadership of the Tahltan Nation, we've always been in active negotiations with new mining proponents, both at the exploration stage with the exploration companies, and then also at the highest level with some of the majors. So at the end of the day, the statistics and the history and the reputation of the Tahltan people speaks for itself, and I'm just honored to be here and to be more involved with getting us more and more involved in this industry for years to come. And I see one day us being equity partners in all the mines that take place in Tahltan territory. So.
Right, and I believe your territory is roughly the size of Portugal, and that gives you an idea just the vastness and what is on offer in British Columbia. I think we'll take it to the Golden Triangle now, and what has attracted you to the region? I'll start with you, Walter.
Yeah, but before I got involved with Skeena, I was involved with the project in the United States, and it was and remains that project adversarial with certain members of the local community and all sorts of NGOs, and it was a painful experience. And to come to British Columbia, where the government's very supportive and knowledgeable about mining, and the same thing for the Tahltan, who we view as our equal partners in this endeavor, and I certainly hope the Tahltan will be equity partners soon in some regard in our projects. So this panel is a reflection of that theme, the partnership between government, local communities, and industry to create successful mining projects that deliver the raw materials that the world needs, but do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable and also generates an attractive return on investment for our shareholders.
So I'm Steve Burleton with GT Gold. We're a fairly new company. We've only been public for a couple of years now, and I've been with the company for less than a year. And what attracted me to the opportunity was really the project itself and the potential, but more than that, it was the Golden Triangle and the reputation for being a prolific mining area. And so to me, that meant that mines were getting built, and we've seen two get built, one right beside us, the Red Chris mine, within the last 5 or 6 years. And then you have the Petroleum mine that's been built and started recently. And so, when you're looking at a new venture, you want to make sure that you can advance it. The other thing is very important to a young company like ours is financing. And Dave made mention of the tax credits. The benefit as a junior mining company in Canada of being able to monetize those tax credits gives us a lot of leverage on our financing. So using the flow-through structure, recently we just announced a $17.6 million financing in which Newmont purchased a 9.9% interest in our company. And they were part of a flow-through structure that allowed us to get a 53% premium to the price they invested in, which is much less dilutive to us as a company, which is very important as a CEO. You want to keep control of that. That was very attractive. And when they made them permanent in the last year, I think that just made it even more attractive. And, the infrastructure is always an important part when you're looking at remote areas in northern BC or anywhere in the world. And the fact, there was a highway running up beside our property. We have the power line to the Red Chris mine 10 kilometers away from us. And as you mentioned, there's a deep water port not too far south from us. So all of these made this a very attractive opportunity for me.
Right. You mentioned, Dave, your budget has been enhanced quite a bit, and I think there's going to be lots of work, especially around permitting and the regulatory process. Now, delays or long wait times for permitting, it's a problem all over the world. How is BC tackling that?
Yeah, and I think it goes to that concept I talked about at the end, which is the question about, does the government actually recognize that as an issue and does it care? And I think in BC what you'll find is we definitely understand the impact of permitting delays, and the evidence of the budget lift I talked about a minute ago is evidence that obviously we do care. And my Assistant Deputy Minister for Mining is here with me, and so we definitely are able now, and it's just happened, our budget process is literally, we're just in the middle of the approval of it, but it's been announced and it will pass. And then we can get on with it. But honestly, it provides an amazing opportunity to staff up our permitting functions, which I think will be very, very helpful. That said, it's not going to make permits easier to get. It's just spinning the machine faster, because it is difficult to get permits, and I don't see that as a negative thing. I mean, we have very rigorous and strong environmental regulations, safety regulations, all of those things, but once you do get a permit from us, it's you don't have to worry about stability of that, or that it's going to change over time. And so the investor confidence that comes with those permits, I think, is pretty solid.
Right. Thanks. Chad, I know you are a qualified lawyer, and you've been involved in lots of agreements between the Tahltan Nation and companies, I guess other governments. Can you give us an idea of what is your priorities when you go into these negotiations, and how do you approach it? And if you're sitting around a table, what is the sort of conversations that you have?
Yeah, so we attack it from several different levels. We first and foremost got to make sure that the environment is properly looked after. So we have a very thorough environmental team that's made up of Tahltan and non-Tahltan experts. We make sure that we're involved with every step of the process, and that's good for industry and government because we have a lot of local knowledge that ensures that things are being done better for the future of the environment. There's employment pieces, there's contractual pieces, there's revenue sharing pieces, and at the end of the day, we have a very thorough model to ensure that we support the mining industry and the mining industry supports Tahltan. So I give a lot of talks with other First Nations and we try and share that model with them because that's how it works in the modern day world, is that you got to build an agreement that makes sense for the First Nation, and then you have a fair partnership. So.
Right. Back to the Golden Triangle, I guess. When I first heard the term, I thought it was maybe thought up by some marketing department, but it's called the Golden Triangle for a reason, and its mining dates back to the 1860s. Between 1920 and 1950, the region actually had the largest gold mine in all of North America. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the historic mining and what it means for you, for your two projects, the SNP and the SK?
Sure. Our two projects, SNP and SK Creek, we were able to either buy or option both of those from Barrick. And they were very high-grade, past-producing mines, but they operated in a time period when the price of gold was lower, and B, there wasn't the infrastructure that Dave is describing. That didn't exist back when those mines were in operation. And I'll just give you the example of SK Creek. The decision to shut that mine down was made, I believe, around 2006, and it shut down in first quarter 2008. And if you remember back at that time period, the price of gold was between $350 and $450. So a lot lower. But the other aspect was it was a diesel-powered mine. It was diesel and propane. And if you think back to that time period around 2006, the price of gold was over $100 a barrel. So it was a very hard, difficult time period to be, from a cost perspective and also a pricing perspective. So now we have much higher prices, and thanks to the Northwest Transmission Line and several new hydroelectric facilities, we now have really inexpensive hydropower that's 7 kilometers from SK Creek. So we can plug into power that's probably going to run us maybe 6 or 7 cents Canadian. And if that were diesel, the cost equivalent would be like 35 to 37 cents if it were diesel powered. So a huge shift in the cost structure for that project. And that's why we think we're going to be able to bring SK Creek back into production.
Right.
So that's an example of what attracted us there is the improvements in infrastructure, but combined with the history of these incredible mineral discoveries. And there are lots of them. So there's lots more opportunity to do what we're doing with SK Creek in other parts of the province.
For us, when I joined this company a year ago, it was really a gold-silver story based on Saddle South, and that was the future of the company. And we had poked a couple of holes about 1.5 kilometers away that gave a bit of a different indication. It was a porphyry style, low grade at surface, and part of the history is learning from what's happened in the area. And if people know the story of Red Chris was originally going to be a sort of an open pit, lower grade, but a smaller operation. But they sunk a deep hole in 2009 that hit very high grades, copper and gold. And so based on that history, we designed a program where we were going to poke a few holes last summer in this area just to see if that held true. And sure enough, originally we were going to poke 3 or 4 holes in, and we ended up going 11 holes because we had some fabulous hits down below. We had an intercept of over 1.1 kilometers grading 0.8% copper equivalent, which is world-class hole. so that's been very important. And Chad alluded to this. I mean, the Tahltan have been involved in mining for generations and generations. And as a small company, we're very reliant on the community around us to help us. We don't have the manpower, the knowledge, and so I think having the Tahltan work with us, and they are, we work with them in many different ways. We hire a number of Tahltan to work with us during the drill season. We rely on Tahltan businesses, services, and joint venture companies to help. And then, just the support of the community has been very, very, very helpful. So that has been very beneficial for us. And as I said, in 2 years, we've been able to advance, 2 different projects to a point where a major, the largest gold company in the world has taken an interest in us. So it takes a team to get there. And we're very grateful for all the support.
I think another question for you, Dave. I know there's a Mining Innovation Fund that's also been set up over and above the Regional Mining Alliance Fund. Now Vancouver has a very thriving tech sector. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the field of mining technology?
Yeah, that's quite exciting, and I mentioned that when I talked about the supports of this current government for mining. There was a nice chunk of money made available to do that over a few years to look at innovation, and it's to be determined because we're going to do this in partnership with our industry and First Nations partners. But the ideas that we're exploring branch off in a few directions. For example, I mentioned earlier, BC is a jurisdiction that has a very strong kind of advocacy. Well, we have a minority government, and the minority partner in that government is the Green Party. So for all sorts of reasons, that's one of the innovation angles that we're going to look at. How does the GHG intensity of products being produced get affected by what technology gets used is one angle. Looking at working with Teck, who is our largest partner, obviously, and one in the southeast corner of the province, around how to deal with issues like selenium and what are the technologies that might be brought to bear there in that arena. And then also, working with industry and hopefully some exciting things that we can be talking about next year here around how to be part of the emerging conversation going on around ESG in corporations, and how do you know how environmentally and socially responsibly produced your products are, and can you track your product back through your supply chain to figure out where your materials are coming from, and do you care about that, and if so, how do you track that? And I think BC is a really interesting place to invest because I think that notion is going to grow. I think it's going to grow a lot for all sorts of reasons, and it's yet another thing that lowers your risk of investing in British Columbia, that you're going to have a really good ESG story.
Right. Chad, we've just mentioned the environment. Obviously, that was the first thing that you mentioned that the Tahltan Nation look at. I've been up to the Golden Triangle area. It is one of the most spectacular landscapes you can imagine. Can you talk a little bit more about your focus on the environment and your nation's, the way you live?
Yeah, well, the way we live is up there. That's where guide outfitting actually started in British Columbia. We still have abundant wildlife populations up there. All of the iconic Canadian animals you can think of are in Tahltan territory. We have the Skeena River in Tahltan territory. That's the Grand Canyon of Canada. It still has healthy salmon populations. And we believe that we're very well balanced. We support industry when it's done the right way, and we're very involved with the mining industry and others from early on. But yeah, it's an exciting time for us, and being in that region, we have 3 communities. It's been a really exciting time with the changes in Indigenous law and discourse. We're at a place now where we're really able to build up our communities and our infrastructure and our capacity, and that's been fueled a lot by the mining industry. And people are welcome to come up there. It's a very isolated region, but it's our homeland. It's gorgeous, and we're always working on more and more environmental initiatives to make sure that we walk that delicate balance between supporting economic development, but making sure that it's done properly so that we can continue to protect the environment, not just for Tahltan people, but for British Columbians, for Canadians, for the world.
So I know on mining.com, when Petroleum and the Brucejack mine comes up, if there's news about them, then it's always widely read. Last year was their first full year of commercial production. Dave, can you take us through the permitting process there and how that worked?
Sure, very briefly. I think there was two First Nations involved in they were front and center on the process we worked through with First Nations on that project. Chad was one of them, the Niska was the other, both of whom were involved, obviously, in their part of that. I would say it's a great example of that tension that we have in BC between the environment and expediting and supporting mining, because there was a need to build a power line, which was not easy. I mean, it was a tricky project to get that power line permitted, and the other thing that was quite tricky was it was a recent area that was recently glaciated, and so there was a freshwater body up there, which luckily didn't have fish in it, but nonetheless drained towards Alaska. And there is a very strong and vocal lobby presence in Alaska, thanks to the history of the Pebble Mine in that neck of the woods. Right. And they turned their attention to us. But the reason I mention all of that is because none of that distracted us from the job at hand. And if you talk to Petroleum, they'll tell you that the government was incredibly supportive through that, and in fact, there was a lot of days where they needed our help with their investors, and we were there telling them, don't believe what you're reading, don't believe the stories you're hearing from those other guys. Here's what's actually happening when it comes down to the permits and permitting, and I think if Petroleum was here, they'd tell you that the province's willingness to do that made a massive difference to kind of the myth busting of what was happening with that project.
Right, and going forward, that would sort of be the timelines you are looking at?
No, we aspire to do better, and like I say, that's, if you looked at the work we have done with industry, that's one of the complaints they have is not that permits are hard to get. People are proud of having a permit. What they want is to have the machine spin faster, and so that is good evidence of what we're now turning our minds to. We do want to speed up permitting, there's no doubt, and with the resources we now have, I'm very confident we will be.
Right, Walter and Steve, maybe you can talk about that process.
I'd love to ask Dave a question. Do you think there's any possibility of seeing flow-through credits increased in BC?
Yeah, that's really a question for the finance guys, and we've been advocates for some of the recent changes year over year for a long time. The control mechanism for that is actually over the Ministry of Finance. But to answer your question, I think because what these credit schemes do is they generate activity, and that activity generates wealth. And the key is turning these things into mines with, we heard the statistics at the beginning of this session. That is persuasive to those people over at finance. We've seen it in other industries. And I think, if we can keep the snowball momentum going, I think there's a lot of possibility.